Welcome to Dive into Health MD, the podcast where we explore how everyday habits shape your physical, cognitive, and financial well-being. Through conversations with physicians, scientists, and farmers, we explore how daily choices like food, movement, sleep, and mindset shape the health and life we experience, with special episodes on sourcing high-quality food ingredients. We do our best to stay up to date, and we're always open to refining our thinking as new knowledge emerges. I'm your host, Dr. Akshita Mehta. Let's dive in. So, welcome to our episode today. We have Dr. Domenica Melinda Urzi with us, and I am so excited to chat with you about all of your work. If you want to just start off and telling us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm a social scientist on a PhD from the School of Sociology and Social Policy of the University of Nottingham here in the UK. And I start learning about the food system while investigating the reality of migrants, agricultural workers in Southern Europe. And I realized by observing their living conditions how much the entire food system was more compromised than expected. So I interviewed and observed a variety of stakeholders involved in the agricultural sector in Southern Europe and particularly in Sicily, where I come from. And by interviewing not just the farmer workers, but also farmers, food engineers and local politicians and journalists and trade unions came to learn more about how the food industry is now mainly monopolized by multinational corporations that control the seeds that are used in order to produce fruit and vegetables, but also the logistic and the distribution of these agricultural products. So thanks to my PhD, I start to understand how the fruit and vegetables that we consume today have less and less to do with nature, seasonality, biodiversity, and more with patented seeds and use of pesticides, herbicides, and chemical fertilizers in order to reach the end result of harvesting those fruits and vegetables. And I witnessed firsthand the effect of those pesticides and herbicides that can have on the workers that are managing those substances. But we don't really know how many workers are protected when handle those substances. But that already made me think how those substances then can be harmful. And I saw firsthand, I saw with my eyes how many of those farmer workers actually experience skin reactions and respiratory problems. And then now I also looked into more evidence, and there are strong link of these pesticides and herbicides with also forms of degenerative disorders like Parkinson and also some case of cancers. And therefore, from that moment on, let's say my research was not anymore academic. It became very personal in terms as a consumer, as now a mother. I began to explore more and more how the food that we eat is produced. And I realized that the entire food system, the entire supply is quite being hijacked and reorganized in the hand of multinational corporations, names like Syngenta or Bayer, and they also absorb Monsanto. These are only some of the biggest names, but there are many others. And those companies, they have patented the seeds that we use to grow those fruits and vegetables. And they also lock farmers into what we call chemical dependency. So each single seed that produce a plant we only, let's say, complete the full cycle if it's accompanied by certain pesticides and certain herbicides and some chemical fertilizer. They are sold to the farmer at the beginning of the season in order to then be able to harvest the crop. And this was quite revealing, and I decided to never stop investigating how the food that we eat is produced. So after my PhD, I continue my investigation as a consumer, as a citizen, as a person. And I just realized how much the food that is already compromised because it's not anymore original. It's been patented, so it's been bred to display certain features, certain characteristics in terms of consistency, look, shape, and so on, is selected in order to produce a fruit or a vegetable that can last longer on supermarket shelf. So once the food is harvested, then it travels across countries, sometimes long distances, and then it lands on our supermarket shelves, and then we buy it and we take it home and consume it. There is a very long time from when that food was produced to when it's actually consumed, and there are clear consequences of this way of producing in terms of how much we might miss from the nutrients that this food is supposed to give to our body. And as a consequence, a less nutritious, dense food that we are exposed to these days. And then I continue investigating the link between this food, and once this food then hit manufacturing, and then it's goes through levels of processing and how much we carry on losing in terms of nutrients while this food get processed, and to the point where it seems quite clear that we are not anymore eating food that is nutrient dense as it's supposed to be in order to support human health.
Incredible. Well, thank you for all the work that you've been doing. And to backtrack a little bit, part of the way that we got connected is you just wrote this book, and it's called the Ultra Processed Free Family Guide and Cookbook. And you really break down all of these different steps. And I think what you and I are both trying to do is the education piece, right? This isn't fear that, we want to instill in anyone, but the more that we are educated, the more that we understand our food system, where it's coming from, where the issues are, then we're empowered to make different choices. And we have lots of options available. One thing that you mentioned was the pesticides, and that was part of your initial research looking at these farmers and the effects. And one really good reason to look at it is because that's the population that has the largest exposure. What we don't have good data on is the cumulative effect. So if there are these residues on not just one product, but many products that we then incorporate into one meal, right? The dose is higher than just a study being done on a single fruit or vegetable. And so what these farmers unfortunately experience are probably the highest exposure of these products because they're working with them on a daily basis. And it allows us to show that even if some of the studies have shown safety, that maybe a dose response, really the culprit for why some people are experiencing some of these symptoms. It's when we're eating these things every day for decades, then we have these cumulative effects. Is that something that you found as well?
Yeah, absolutely. In the book, I talk about level of exposure, and because we are completely immersed in this food system now, we are all very much exposed to those substances on a regular basis. And as you said, the scientific evidence is catching up, so we are lagging behind and we are missing important information as consumers. And that's why I felt also the urgency to write the book and trying to give as many tools to people that they can put into practice immediately to start and reducing their exposure to those substances. So in the book, I really focus on trying to give us many usable, practical tips. Like, for example, one that I tend to tell everybody, which it sounds for some people very common, but actually I learned that it's not as common as we might think. That is to wash thoroughly your vegetables and your fruits before consuming them. Many people just don't. And sometimes people justify that because they think, oh, I'm peeling the fruit, so there is no need to wash. But even handle it can sort of carry the residues on your hands, for example. And the skin is an organ and absorbs substances. So it's very important that we wash thoroughly these vegetables and fruits. And that could be step number one that I suggest to everybody to do. Then there are many other tips that I give, like, for example, peel fruits and vegetables, although we know that in the skin there are fibers, there are vitamins, there are also part of the food, and it's important for us to eat those substances. But unfortunately, often is where the pesticides residues are. There are other tools that we can put into action, like for instance, bicarbonate of soda is being proven to reduce the residues of pesticides between 40 to 60%, because also there is a variety of those pesticides. So then it's not just one single substance. So it depends on what fruit, what vegetable, and what pesticides we're talking about. But in general, soaking in bicarbonate of soda seems to help, and also the use of vinegar can also help. And these are items that are found in most kitchens.
How much baking soda should we be soaking it in?
So it depends what we're talking about. So first of all, I always suggest to people to be informed on the moss spray crops. So for instance, strawberries and spinaches and grapes tend to be the moss spray crops. So I will use a teaspoon per 100 grams, and I would just soak in plenty of water. I would not leave them too long because it might spoil the fruit or the vegetable itself, but at least a good 10 minutes, and then I will wash through again. It's worthwhile, I think.
Yeah. And then does rinsing with just tap water, does that do anything?
Oh, God. Yeah, so when we look at the literature inside pesticides, the problem is that pesticides don't just stay where they get sprayed, they also leak into the soil. And so the soil get contaminated, but also the water supplies can get contaminated. I personally invested in a very good water filter, although I live very near the countryside, and in theory, the water that goes through my tap water should be quite clean, because it depends on where you live in the world. But where I live, I could taste the heavy metals, and I could taste some substances, taste chlorine in the water, because sometimes we might think that just rinsing with tap water is enough. But what if our water supplies is contaminated? It goes in circles. So yeah.
There you go. Things that can make a big difference over time. And then the other thing that, seems kind of obvious to talk about is the organic label. And, other side of the coin where people say, well, organic can still use, some pesticides, maybe not a certain list of pesticides, but is that something that you have found to be worth it to pursue?
Yes, first of all, organic food is unavailable and unreachable for millions and millions of people. So, in an ideal world, what we eat should be organic. 100 years ago, we didn't have the problem of pesticides residues in our fruits and vegetables. We didn't have the problem of chemical fertilizers. Everything was organic. And the problem with organic is that now it's so unavailable for so many people. Is a luxury these days. So for how much I wish to say we should be eating organic, I understand it's not reachable for many. But at the same time, yes, there are some pesticides used in organic farming, but they are defined as biopesticides. So they are natural compounds, the sort of contrast pests, and there are also the technique used in organic farming to try and contain pests and, let's say, increase the chances to harvest a rich crop. There can be physical, mechanical techniques. So yes, organic farming is ideal. And what I suggest in the book is probably trying to at least buy organic, the fruit and vegetables that are mostly sprayed. Again, going back to the example of grapes and strawberries and spinaches, but also it depends in the part of the world where you live in. It could be also apples and pears that are highly sprayed. So I regularly check those organizations that are available in most countries, and I give some indications in the book as well on how to stay up to date with the top 10, let's say, most sprayed crops, and trying to at least shop organic for those items. But yes, in theory, biopesticides are less harmful, if not harmful, and also more easy to wash away with tap water. So it should be safer.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We don't have to have perfection here. And that's another part of the puzzle, and where it really makes sense to get into the details and the nuances. So 2 pesticides are not equivalent, and you've already alluded to this. Some have different effects than others. And so typically what we see on the organic list, if pesticides are used, overall seem to be less toxic compared to the conventional produce. So it seems to be worth it to pursue it if you have the means and if it's available to you, understanding that, there is a financial component to that. And then another thing I want to ask you a little bit more about, you were talking about the seeds and how nutrient density in the foods that we have start when farmers are starting to plant, these seeds in the ground. And can you tell us a little bit more about where the seeds come from and what the life cycle is like?
So effectively, the fruit and vegetables that we consume today, the seeds won't be able to reproduce themselves, which is mind blowing when I learned about this. So every single year, every single season, farmers will have to go back to those companies to buy brand new, let's say, mini plants to then bring it to the greenhouses and then cultivate until they can harvest. So this chemical dependency obviously gives enormous power to multinational corporations to keep the monopoly over the entire agricultural sector and keeping those farmers locked in and unable effectively to decide on any aspect of the work that they do. Of course, initially it was done to increase the chances of successful harvest and also breeding seeds in order to increase their shelf life was done initially to sort of meet the demand for more fruits and vegetables with a growing population around the world. But the thing went a bit out of hand when then the regulations around pesticides have been so weak that substances that are actually harmful to humans have been widely applied without overseeing the effect that they might have on humans. Yeah, and we are realizing that because we are struggling in many levels with health, and there are many links that have been increasingly established between pesticides and effect on human health. So on one hand, we're trying to meet a demand for more fruits and vegetables, and on the other, we just start doing it in a way that we lost the sight of what is ethical and what is nutritional and acceptable even.
Yeah, it's a really interesting part of history to learn about and to think about. There was the Green Revolution and a time where we had to figure out, well, how do we feed the world, right? How do we make enough food so that we don't have famine? And we solved that problem. And so there's only really specific seeds that farmers are allowed to use. And to explain that a little bit more, if you're to plant broccoli, for example, there's not just one type of broccoli plant. There are so many varietals. And this is true of all food. There's so many different types of lettuce. There's so many different types of tomatoes and all of the above. But what farmers are given is one specific kind, or maybe just a selected few, because of really selected reasons that increase the monetization and that allow these companies to function as a business. And that's what it ultimately comes down to, right? That's what everything usually comes down to. What happens is these seeds that they have selected for, they all grow uniformly, which is something that we've been accustomed to looking for. They all have a longer shelf life, like you're talking about, right? Something that we have found has been helpful in our food system that we want for convenience. And they all grow at relatively the same time. So all of these steps help the farmer develop a uniform process. And then when we pair that with the chemicals and pesticides, we increase the yield of what they're growing because they're not losing crops to these things that are just normal and part of nature. So some of these things were put in place just to create more and more and more food, but we sort of lost the nutrition along the way, and the nutritional component of the food was never really taken into account much. And that's where we start seeing seed saving initiatives, where if we can save the seeds from some of these different varietals, and we see a little bit more nutrient density. And so now our apples are bigger, our broccoli is bigger, our tomatoes are bigger, but the nutrient density of that is not equivalent. And so we've diluted the nutrients that's in our food. So someone can have a caloric dense meal and they can eat a good quantity of food, but when the nutrients in that have been diluted, our bodies really aren't seeing the effect of eating the calories that we are, even when we are choosing produce.
Yeah, absolutely. Those multinational corporations, they are businesses, and as a consequence, their primary interest is the return on their investments, and they operate. But we're talking about food, we're talking about feeding humanity. So it is not like independent from what these fruits and vegetables will cause to humans. And as you said, in nature there are so many variety of any fruit and vegetable, while instead as a consumers now we are used to think that tomatoes should only look in a certain ways and pears should look this certain ways, and we are only exposed to two three varieties that are regularly on the shelves, and then maybe one or two that can be more seasonal, but in nature is completely different the situation. I remember full well when I was growing, and how much food can vary even from region to region, from a county to another county, and there could be even exchanges among areas of those different fruits and vegetables, different types of strawberries, for example, in size and shapes and color and taste and nutrients as well. And we are losing all of that, and we cannot afford to lose that heritage. So it definitely is a conversation worth having, and definitely is a section of the market that is worth supporting.
Yeah, it's so interesting talking to so many different people. And when we talk to older generations, I mean, they can remember when food didn't look like what it looked like today. You know, they talk about how wheat used to grow up to the necks, right? And now we've only really selected for dwarf varieties. And so they're growing really short to the ground because then, you know, wind can't knock it over and ruin a crop. And so there's all these things that we've done in farming to help farmers with a larger harvest, but the nutrition really hasn't played a part. And we've seen how food's changed over time. And as consumers, we've gotten used to it. We expect to go to the grocery store and see a whole bunch of zucchini that look exactly the same. And
And
then
all
we just
year
pick it.
around as well.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So another big thing that we can talk about, can you tell us why is it helpful to eat local and seasonal? Why does that matter?
So one thing I think is important to reflect on is the fact that food is important to stay seasonal, and follow the rhythm of nature, and also give the chance to the soil to rest. And this is something that doesn't happen with intensive agriculture. And this is also why we use those chemicals in order to keep producing without giving the chance to the soil to rest. And that is why we start hearing more and more talk about regenerative agriculture that only means like just to follow the rhythm of nature and the seasonality in order to again be able to get as much nutrients as possible from the fruits. And also by eating seasonal we are more likely to eat a fruit or a vegetable that's been harvested not a long time ago. So if we eat from a rich soil, a fruit or a vegetable that also is nutrient dense, then we increase our chances to be properly nurtured and to have the ability to support our human life and our system, our body. So it's very important to try and rethink the way we eat and rethink in what way we spend our pennies. And as I was saying in the book, every penny that we spend is a vote towards the food system that we want to stay for our children to grow up in. And we can find solutions around this. There are now many box schemes where farmers get together and organize boxes that get delivered to your home, for example. It is also something worthwhile because when you have those boxes of veggies and fruits that also probably were a bit of a stretch of your budget, you sort of more encouraged not to waste anything. So in a way, it can be a plus, an incentive. But in general, again, is a matter of discouraging monocropping and encouraging food diversity and variety and biodiversity and food heritage. So all in all, eating locally is a virtuous cycle, and that we all should be part of. Also, from a sociological perspective, that is always my background, I also see shopping locally and supporting local farmers as a way to contribute to someone's child university course, or someone's child dancing classes. So we should just reconsider the way we eat in a way that we remember that we are part of the same ecosystems together with the trees and the soil and the stars. We're all part of the same system. So what goes in the soil will end up entering our body, and or what we feed to the animals, and then we consume the animal will eventually enter our bodies as well. And also another thing that's often made me think about seasonality is when I was growing up in Sicily 40 years ago, I remember full well when we had to wait summer in order to consume fruits and vegetables like berries, blueberries, and peppers, and eggplants, and zucchini. These are all summer fruits. And I remember very well because school was over and then it was time for my mom and my dad to cook all of those dishes that we've been waiting all year around. And the flavor, and is just so more enhanced that it can be achieved today. And I often reflect to the fact that I have these memories, I have this understanding, but what are the memories and understanding that my children will have, because they are completely immersed in a food system that's completely different than what used to be in the past. So they are more likely to consider packaged food as food, and the taste of fruit and vegetables to be quite bland because they don't even taste anymore the same that they used to. So I don't blame people that really struggle to eat what we call real food, because often this real food doesn't taste anymore what it's supposed to taste. And this is also another reason why we should shop locally, because once you shop from local farms, apart from the fruits and vegetables tend to be bigger, and then the flavor is so more enhanced. So you gain more pleasure from an apple that you buy from a local farmer than an apple that you buy from a supermarket where it doesn't taste of anything, doesn't smell of anything. And so it supports a diet based on real food, shopping locally, I think, and my experiences anyway. So
Yeah. I mean, that ties into a whole nother component. Food is this just really fun aspect of life, right? It's something that we enjoy together. It brings people together, it brings families together. And when it tastes great, there's a huge dopamine response and just happiness response to really good tasting food. And a lot of the things that we have in the grocery stores now have been very diluted or are also kind of old. I mean, we've touched on this a little bit, but we haven't talked a lot about the transportation system and the storage of food. And we talked about how people are expecting to see all kinds of food all year round in the grocery store, and we think of that as normal now. But if there's an apple in the grocery store during a certain time of year where apples don't grow, how long ago was that harvested? How was it stored? How long has it been kept in cold storage? And I think for sometimes it can be months before it's even put onto a grocery store shelf, just to make sure that we have things available year round. Do you know, or have you found that fruit and vegetables that were harvested a very long time ago, does the nutritional density of that decline over time versus something that you eat, right after
yeah,
harvesting?
absolutely. Absolutely, yes. And also there is another aspect to that. There is we are used to eat fruits and vegetables all year round. And also, as you said, they can be refrigerated for a long time before they hit our supermarket shelves. But then also they might come from other countries where maybe the fruit and vegetables are in season in that moment in time. And that brings another set of problems, because often what happens, and we see here, for instance, in the UK very clearly after Brexit, the exit of the UK from the European Union, most of fruits and vegetables now come from developing countries like Morocco, Egypt, sometimes even from South Africa, which is at the other end of the hemisphere. I mean, fruit and vegetables that come from the other end of the planet, they've been definitely traveling for a long time before arriving on the supermarket shelf, and they clearly don't taste the same of a more local produce. And definitely they look the part, but they don't taste the thing. And also in those countries, the regulations on, well, on labor relations and also on pesticides and chemicals can be way weaker than in our countries. So there could be substances that might forbidden in our countries, but they're still entering the market because they are imported from other countries. So this is another set of problem that sort of expose us as consumers to the risks of substances that are actually illegal in our countries.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting when you learn all of the different details, right? A berry is just
Also
not a
scary. Yeah.
berry. And a berry in the United States, if you're in California, is not the same berry as if you're in New York or in Maine or on the East Coast of the United States, because most of those either come from California, they come from the West Coast, or they come from Mexico. And so the transportation time, depending on where you are in the country, it might be 7 or 9 days after harvest before it even gets to the grocery store. And then we also have this idea that we want that produce to last for a week or so in our fridge. It could be a week or two old before we're really consuming this product. And it is a different product than if we were just to harvest it and then consume it right away. So it's helpful to learn what does grow in your region around you and to make those choices. And again, no one needs to be perfect. If you like berries and if that's part of your rotation, or you and I were talking earlier, if that's something that your kids love and you want to buy them for your kids, then that's great. And then we just rotate in other things that are seasonal and local, and we just try and balance what we're eating. So no one has to be perfect. It doesn't mean that you can't eat things if they don't grow in your region. But I think just having that understanding and making those informed choices is really what we're going for and can go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. There are obviously examples like citrus fruits, oranges, satsumas, tangerines. They, for instance, don't grow in the UK because the weather doesn't allow it. But Southern Europe, for instance, is very rich of those. So even like looking at the origin of fruits and vegetables before you're shopping and trying to make a more informed decisions can be helpful. So for instance, when I go to the supermarkets and I see fruits and vegetables, particularly citrus fruits in this particular case from South Africa, I don't encourage that. I'm really sorry. I would not encourage that business or, that way of producing and stocking supermarket shelves. I rather don't buy it and grab, I don't know, other fruits like, I don't know, kiwi from Italy. They still contain vitamin C if it's vitamin C that I'm after, for example. Or I might wait until I can find some Spanish or some Italian citrus fruits because I know they have a smaller environmental footprint. And I also know that they come from a region where many pesticides are forbidden and the regulations on substances used in agriculture are stricter. And in that way, I feel safer. I still wash them thoroughly and I still peel them, of course, but I feel like I'm making a small step towards more safety, if you want.
Yeah. There are so many small steps that we can all make to making change.
Absolutely.
And the more that, we're interested in buying these products, then the more these stores will also respond to that demand. And if we want to buy eggs, if we only really look for the pasture raised eggs, now granted, they're way more expensive, but if we look for pasture raised eggs that only have organic feed, then they'll learn those habits too, and the stores will respond. It kind of takes us and our choices as well to play a big role in that. But yeah, this has been great. So we've talked about, the food and how it's grown and some of the problems at least that have come into that. Can we talk about the processing of that food and what it's kind of turned into today and why there are some issues related to that?
Yes, so when we look at how these raw materials, let's say, are produced and they're already quite depleted, and then they hit manufacturing and they go through all the level of processing in order to create the food that then get packed and, again, sold on supermarket shelf, then it's quite common sense to start wondering how nutritious really is this food. And then you come across the arguments pro fortification when we have, for instance, wheat that's been fortified with vitamins because through the level of processing that wheat goes through these days, it loses those vitamins. And then you start wondering like, yeah, okay, but can synthetic vitamins added to food be equivalent than the natural version of it. And my common sense will say no, probably we need to extract those nutrients straight from the source and straight from, how nature has intended for us to have those nutrients. So the link to ultra processed food is quite strong. And when we also add that to the level of processing that the food goes through, then there is a level of food additives added to the food in order to preserve its consistency, its look, and again, its shelf life. Then the end product, quite frankly, lacks the real basics of what food is supposed to be. That is about supporting our level of energy, our mental clarity, our hormonal balance, our cellular health, and our digestive system, and so on and so forth. And so let's say the link is quite clear for now, probably millions of people around the world that are seeing how much we have entered an era of chronic diseases, and that clearly stem from a food system that is not able anymore to feed us to the level that we need, and also an health system that is not able to cure us. So the link is obvious to hundreds and hundreds of people, and since I'm on my journey, I'm meeting people from all walks of life, and we all see it clearly that we need to start fighting back for, first of all, food system that can guarantee optimal health, and secondly, for transparency on food labels that is lacking these days.
Absolutely. And so to take that back and clarify a little bit, when we talk about ultra processed foods, let's really define that. So when we start with produce, I mean, all food essentially starts with something that was grown from the ground. And so we start with that. When we harvest it, that's what we're really talking about is real food. When we take a tomato off of the vine, right? Or when we pick an apple from the tree or a pear from the tree. Everything that happens after that is some level of processing. And not all processing is bad, but there are a lot of foods that have been processed that we now know is not beneficial to our health. And there's so many layers to that, where the amount of processing and the additives and the preservatives that have been put into these things have really essentially diminished or hindered any nutritional value that's left in what that initial food started off like. And can you tell us a little bit more about the health effects of eating ultra processed foods?
Yes, the main issue we are facing is first of all, that when we talk about ultra processed food, we are trying to define such a wide array of food that can be edible or drinkable. Therefore, we have a problem with definition of this food or those drinks. We can rely on some classification. So once you start your journey into ultra processed food, one of the first classification that you come across is the NOVA system. This is a classification that has been developed by Professor Carlos Monteiros. Is a Brazilian professor and his team that are pioneer on the conversation on ultra processed food. And they have classified food into 4 groups. In the Nova one, we find all what we would consider real food. So let's say an apple, a chicken, an orange. Then we have the Nova 2 group that involves the food that we define as a culinary ingredients that are useful to cook. So for instance, olive oil is extracted from olives, but it's been going through level of processing that we could consider gentle in order to extract the oil from the olive and becomes olive oil. And we use that for cooking. The same could be the example milling flours, for example, is a level of processing that the wheat goes through, but is gentle enough so that what we call the food metrics is still intact. The food metrics is what is very important to focus on when we talk about processing. How much through the processing the balance that the original fruit or vegetables had in nature. So let's say the balance between the fiber, the water content, the vitamin, how much is being disrupting through the processing. So until Nova 1 and Nova 2 groups, let's say, this food matrix is almost intact. is preserved. But then we have the Nova 3, that is where the processed food sort of belongs to. And this is a food that still retains some level of food metrics, but the processing level is heavier. A typical example could be like a tin of baked beans, for example, with tomato sauce, beans, and maybe water, salt, and citric acid, and maybe an emulsifier, sort of pectin. This is already a food that has been going through a level of processing that is harder. The food is still retaining its nutrients and its metrics, like I was mentioning, but we now exposing ourselves to some chemical additives to the food. And not all the additives necessarily are harmful. And this is something that I clearly make a distinction in the book. What additives can be harmful, the ones that are more risky and the ones that are less risky, and the ones that are actually safe. And then we have the Nova 4 group. And in this particular group, we find an array of food and beverage as well that is being so processing to the level where the food matrix is being quietly compromised or disrupted completely, and a serious level of food additives have been added to the food in order to keep the shelf life, the consistency, the taste, and so on. Here we find the food, for instance, that has stabilizers, preservatives, colorants, flavor enhancements, and natural flavorings or flavorings in general. These are all chemicals added to that food in order to present it and keep it for what it is. Typical examples can be, for instance, ready meals. Now, here we need to be very careful because not all ready meals have this amount of food additives added to it or have been so processed to destroy the food metrics. But let's say ready meals often can be the ones that are mostly ultra processed and with the highest number of food additives. So learning to read the labels in this particular case is extremely important in order to make a distinction between a ready meal, so that it has some additives, but they are safe to eat, and some that actually can be quite disrupting and harmful if consumed on a regular basis. But other examples could be like candies and sugary drinks and fizzy drinks. These are all chocolate bars. These are all examples of food that when you read the labels, basically you cannot recognize most of the ingredients. And even if there are some real ingredients, the percentage of those real ingredients are very small in order for us to consider it natural enough for our body to recognize it and extract some nutrients from it.
That's super helpful. Another part of it too, in terms of the processing, is, as you're saying at the end, even if it does have some real food ingredients that you can recognize, sometimes the processing techniques almost get rid of the nutrients that were originally in that food. So wheat, if it's a whole wheat product, does have some natural oils, some natural fibers, some natural vitamins. But when heated to an extreme and, pressed into a cracker or something, those don't always remain in the final food. And so how far are we getting away from a wheat berry, which is the end product of wheat that's grown? And once we process it so much to where it looks completely different, it's not always the case, but sometimes even those nutrients are lost. And it's not actually giving our bodies, very much. And something that I think you did a great job talking about in the book is another whole layer of this, and the effect on health is when we don't get our nourishment from the food that we're eating, it makes us want to continue snacking. And then our energy just kind of declines and gets pretty depleted. So it does tend to be a cycle. And so when we're eating all this food that doesn't have much nutrient density to it, it doesn't signal proper satiety signals to our body to say, okay, we got what we needed out of that meal. Now I'm okay for a little while. We don't need to eat anymore. And it makes us want to eat really frequently after consuming a pretty caloric dense meal. Sometimes, even an hour later, we might start to feel hungry again. And our body's just not getting those signals and not getting the nutrients that it's looking for. And so it's telling you, hey, give me something else. Find me something else that has some nutrition in it. And we end up snacking and then having this pretty poor cycle of continuously eating. And then there's almost an addictive effect to this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, just to go back to what you were saying, that I think is very important, this cycle of snacking, not feeling full and so on, because we are keep consuming food that lacks nutrients. And that feeds into my critique to ultra-processed food defined as convenient food. I really feel is a false economy, a false idea that's been sold to us. It's convenient because you grab and go, and if you need a carbohydrate source, and you got a pack of crackers, and they've maybe been in your cupboards for weeks, and you don't have to go to the bakery and buy the bread. Yes, it's convenient in times time convenient, but it's not convenient in terms of the nutritional value that you extracted from the body. And also because this food is designed for overconsumption, you're going to end up spending probably even more in crackers without even getting the nutrients from the same food that you want to feed yourself from. So yes, so I'm a full believer that we've been missold this food. And when we're looking at snacking, for instance, we will be much better off snacking on, I don't know, boiled eggs or a mozzarella or olives than snacking on food that comes from highly processed food that doesn't exist, let's say, in nature in that particular form. Let's say even mozzarella doesn't exist in nature in that particular form. It comes from milk, but let's say the level of processing is gentle enough to retain those nutrients, going back to the idea of the food matrix. Sorry, that I was talking about. At the same time, what we've been increasingly established in academic debate, but also through studies that have been proven, is that because this food is not just innocent, um, is there because before reaching the supermarket shelf, it's been going through a level of vetting through people that participate in food experiments and the experiments that companies do on this food before they actually get out in the market and they marketize it to us. And these research participants, not just tasting this food, they actually scanned, so their brain gets scanned. And these food scientists have a clear understanding before that products end up on the market shelf, what reaction the brain will have after you eat that food. So when we consider this element before eating food that comes in packaging and heavily marketized to us, then we understand what we are up and against. And the academic debate is now pushing to have ultra-processed food to be recognized as a source of addiction. But again, it's very complicated because compared to other substances that cause addiction, let's say drugs or tobacco, you can single them out. While with ultra-processed food is a different matter, and there are always loopholes and guidelines on food that might can still guarantee to factories and companies to go away with food that actually is designed to be addictive, is designed to create that craving so that the person wanted to go back and consume more of it. And this explains also why so many people struggle with the relationship with food, which is very complicated to begin with, because as you said, food is a part of pleasure in life, and people can have a very difficult and different relationship with food. So again, it's very individual, the way we experience food and the way we understand the food, the relationship we have sometimes can be also linked to our trauma, our unmet needs, our level of stress. It can be related to our social life or lack of social life. So there are so many factors to consider when we talk about food. But when we see that food addiction can only develop towards food that's been pre-packed, made in a lab, and heavily marketized, then we can, let's say, identify a bit more clearly our, let's say, enemy. And many people struggle to stop eating this food, and many people suffer the consequences of this food. And we're talking about people losing mobility because they are overweight, people struggling with mental health, people struggling with self-regulation, with hormonal balance, with anxiety, and so on and so forth. So the data are now out there. Research is catching up on this food, but the links are quite clear. And so it's quite promising and what is going on. And I feel quite optimistic about being able in the next maybe 5-10 years to be able to establish exactly what is the effect that this food has on us, excuse me, and what we can do in order to protect ourselves. But my suggestion is, while we're waiting, that the academic debates establish a clear-cut definition, the policymakers make the policy changes, the multinational corporations stop lobbying our governments, we can, in the meantime, putting into place steps, baby steps even, on a daily basis that can put ourselves and our families in a safer position.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And something that you touched on was, these foods have been engineered to be addictive, right? So this is not a failure of willpower. And I think another really important thing to bring up, we have pretty clear links to adverse health effects in relation to eating large quantities of ultra processed food. And in America, it's been, the numbers that are thrown around is we're eating 40 to 60% of our calories from ultra processed foods. It's a very, very significant portion of our diet. Some of these foods we don't even realize are ultra processed, and that's part of the problem. But these foods have been engineered to make us want more of them. And so that we come back and we consume more and we purchase more. So even I think just having that understanding of this is not a failure of anybody, but when you know that this was created to be addictive, it kind of helps in our understanding. We can be a little bit more cognizant and aware of, oh, well, there's a reason that, my body's craving this bag of chips again, or this thing that I know to not be real food, and then start making changes from there. And something else that you talk about are sort of the healthy appearing ultra processed foods. There's a lot of these foods that look like they're a good idea, and in your book you talk about things like protein bars or low fat yogurts or bread that is shelf stable for a really long time, and really starting the process of thinking about, well, is this normal? Is this what food is supposed to be like? And then even those questions can help us realize that some of these things that appear healthy probably still fall under that category. And then we can, make changes and hopefully see some health outcomes related to that over time.
Yes, I think we're still catching up.
Yeah.
So I think is an individual choice. We need to take responsibilities for ourselves and our families, because at the moment in time, there won't be any policy that will come and help us. So we sort of have to become those conscious consumers and develop this food literacy in order to spend our pennies more wisely, know a bit more what we are eating, and also so to establish what level of exposure we are actually having towards this food, because obviously everybody eats differently. So we are generalizing here and estimating percentages of exposure to ultra processed food, but in some cases is actually higher than 40-50%. Already here in the UK, we're talking about 57% of diet comes from ultra processed food. And when I say that, what we're talking about is, for instance, a breakfast based on cereals, or as you said, like a pack of bread that comes with a very long ingredient list, and jam that has more sugar than fruits and stabilizes more than flavor. And then we carry on throughout the day through school cafeterias and packet lunch that maybe are made again, or sandwiches or factory products that come from factories. And then we carry on in the evening with I don't know, chicken nuggets, for instance, and hot dogs, and so on and so forth. So it's a diet that is consistently rich in those food that pose risks to human health. So again, it's not a matter of consuming a random pack of crisps on a sausage roll, for example. Is like when it's consistent on a daily basis that we increase our chances to develop serious illnesses.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a really good picture that you just painted of how easy it is to consume these foods and how normalized they've been into our diet. Do you want to give us an example of some things that you like to eat or places that you've been able to find food that you feel like match your values?
Yeah, so I'm on this journey now for 15 years. So, and I call it still a journey because don't take me wrong, I still make mistakes. And sometimes I cannot even believe it. And, you know, like I look at what I bought, like, oh, on earth, I did not check the label. And the way I shop these days is very different than what I used to shop. In the past, shopping for food was like a weekly job and I had to buy as many things as possible. So the job was sorted, at least the fridge and the freezer was stocked and the pantry was stocked, and I was going to be able to make something every day. Now I shop differently on a more regular basis and from different sources as well. So I'm trying to buy the eggs and the poultry and meat from the local farmers. I shop from supermarket still, so like some sauces, some not bread, but more like wraps, for instance. There are some brands that are well known for being clean labels, we call them. So they use a very short amount of ingredients. They're all recognizable and there are no additives to it or additives that are safe to consume. Then I would try and buy fish from the fishmonger and I go around places. I'm lucky enough to live in a place where there are amazing bakeries. So my bread, although it costs quite a lot of money, let's say £5 for a loaf of bread, but because this is the staple of my children's diet, I will increase the quality of any of the foods that we use on a regular basis. The same goes for milk. Milk, I use a milkman. I get my milk delivered to my doorsteps, and I've been using the same company for many, many years. And again, trying to shop wisely, I'm trying to shop ethically, and I'm trying to shop in a way that sustain the local economy, the clean brands, and it's more difficult than once a week shopping trip, but at the same time is safer. Number one, that is my priority for my children, but also I feel better, I look better, and and it supports my level of activities because I'm very active every day and I have two young children and I go around a lot, and the food that I eat I feel sustain my energy level way better than in the past.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think it's a good example. You can build this, but as you mentioned, it took you a long time. And
It
it is a
does,
journey. It
and I'm
is a
still
journey.
fun.
Yeah, yeah, and me too, but I think there are some instances where I have found at least that it has gotten easier. It's almost like a return on your investment. So it was an investment up front to look into these companies, to reach out to them, to talk to them. Sometimes I even went to the farms to, really see if there's no chemicals even anywhere on this farm. I feel really comfortable knowing what's going into that food and what's more importantly not going into that food sometimes. And I've made things streamlined. So there's, a chicken company that I found and I went out and I saw their plant and I saw their whole operation. And there's so many small pieces of that. Their plant is right on the farm. So these chickens aren't traveling for such a long time before harvesting. There's a certain way that they process the chicken meat. There's a certain way that they package it. Same thing with seafood. There's a seafood company that I found. And so now I just almost, on subscription, because everything is a subscription these days, just get these things sent to my door. And it's almost easier. I never have to think about, going to a supermarket and choosing, well, should I get this chicken product or this chicken product? And I wonder what the backstory is here. It comes to me. It's in my freezer. And anytime I want it, it's ready to go. And then it just comes again. And same thing for eggs. It took a long time, but I finally found someone locally who has a bunch of backyard chickens, and she's told me everything that she feeds them. And there's a couple places where I've actually gone to see the chickens and see what they're like, and that they're actually outside. Because interestingly enough, a lot of conventional chicken products, whether it's eggs, hens raised for eggs, or broiler meat for chicken meat, they're kept in these very large warehouses where there's no sunlight, and they're up for 22 hours of the day so that they eat enough to gain weight and really not favorable conditions. But now she just delivers eggs to me, and I get eggs for a bunch of neighbors, and it's gotten easier. So there are some staple products that I found where now it's almost easier than going to the grocery store. I don't even have to think about them. I don't have to put them on my list, and I can just focus on, the couple things that I haven't quite found yet and really slowly build that over time. So if you're someone who, is interested in making these changes, but that sounds incredibly overwhelming to go to 10 different places potentially in a week, that's very understandable, right? It, looking into one or two things and then even challenging, well, how could I even make this easier? You have milk delivered to you. That's fantastic. I'm not sure that's an option where I live, but there are other things that I have. And so there's always something wherever you're living. There's someone growing something or, doing something in a way that probably aligns. And it does take some work and investment up front, but can also make it fun. I took my kids to the farm and they loved it. So it is something that's doable, but not to, diminish the effort that potentially can go into it. But again, as we've talked about in terms of health, the effort is worth it. And when we think about where we want to spend our time and money, if we can maintain really healthy bodies and maintain our health, then we're able to accomplish all these other things that we want to do in our lives. We're able to have the energy to play with our kids and to be present with them and to stay active and to do all these fun activities. So worth it, and really cool to hear that you've been able to find that.
Yeah, no, just I want to add, obviously in the UK, everything is a much smaller scale than in the US. And obviously we need to take into account that not everybody lives near the countryside. Many people live in big cities and they're very far away from those produce and those farmers and those people that deliver to your door. But at the same time, there are box schemes, for instance, so there are great ways to go around this problem and find solutions and avoid yourself to do the trip. And then, as you said, also make sure to include the children on the journey, because they are the generation mostly at risk of not knowing what real food looks like. The generations that are more at risk of being completely bombarded by this type of food that is depleting their energy, is undermining their health. And therefore, if the educational system is not ready there yet in order to equip our children with the right understanding, the right knowledge, then is us as a parents that we need to take a responsibility for that. And I always say that knowing where your food comes from and know how to cook your food is part of a lifelong skills. It's like reading and writing. It's something that you're going to use in the future on an everyday basis. So it's very important that we include the children with us.
Yeah.
This journey. And children are so clever, and I often find that as adults, it's probably because we are tired and we think that by giving the children what they wanted to eat, we again avoid food battles at dinner time, any struggles, any tantrums. But actually, children are extremely clever and extremely curious, and they have a very strong sense of justice. So once you start telling children more about, in a child-friendly language, of course, what is going on in the food system, and you help see through the food served at the school cafeteria or the party venues and the petrol station or gas station, like you guys call it, then you start educating their eyes. And it's extremely important, because I see that every day with my children. Now, one is 10 and one is 6, and they have better standards when it comes to food, and definitely have a critical level of thinking when they go around that makes them establish what we can eat, what would be better not to eat. But they're
Yeah.
still kids, so they still have to be rewarded. I don't want to raise them as a food snobs, or I don't want them to feel ashamed when they consume certain foods. But what I realize is that this food is constantly available, and that is where the risks lies. It's not the random pack of crisps, it's not the occasional pack of candies. It's more an everyday exposure to this food that poses real risks for health. So without demonizing too much food, but with the right education, we need to educate our children's eyes to not waste the truth and to, in the future, be able to remember that we stand up for them. We made the effort for them to see the difference, and then obviously they will decide for themselves, because sometimes things can fire back, isn't it? You might ended up raising a child that can't stop eating junk food if you're not careful. But then at the same time, you need to remember what you done, and you done what you could. And then it's their decision what they're going to do in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we get so many of our habits and our mindset about all sorts of things in life from our parents, right? And how we grew up and what they did. And eating's a big part of that. And things like obesity, run through families, because if eating habits run through families, if this is what you
Mm.
think a dinner plate should look like, you can ask 10 different people and they'll probably say different things. But your perception of what food is really comes through your experience growing up as a family, oftentimes, unless we learn other things and find reasons to do that. So I think that's really important. That's a huge other piece. I feel like we could have a whole conversation about kids and food in relation to kids, because that is an area where ultra processed foods are really, really prevalent. And you and I think, both got particularly interested in this when we had children and we were trying to learn, well, okay, how do I feed my family now? I have these small developing kids and they're rapidly changing and they're rapidly growing. And there was this inherent level of discomfort with just choosing anything from a grocery store shelf. And I think some understanding that even if something is being sold as food, maybe it's not, we shouldn't really think of it as food. But what do? The kids are inundated and surrounded by this stuff. They have friends that come to the park with lots of packaged snacks, and kids want what other kids have, and that's normal. Navigating that landscape requires some intention, but is not impossible to do. And like you said, it doesn't have to be a complete abolishment of anything that comes in a package, but really just mitigating those more daily and routine habits and making sure that they get some whole foods in addition to these things, if that does happen to be part of their diet.
Absolutely. I always suggest people to aim at a good 80 to 20 sort of ratio. So 80% of the time trying to eat our whole food diet. And then those 20% of the times we can go towards parties and trips to the parks and occasional treats and so on. And I think that should be safe enough, as long as they know what's the difference, and as long as they still treating this food as treats, as occasional and not as regular thing to have. But unfortunately, for what I'm saying, this is not necessarily what every other parent is thinking. And we have a very close family friends that the parents are middle class, highly educated. They have the money to potentially even afford an organic diet, but they have no interest and they don't see it. So it's more common than we think that those children get fed loads of this type of food. And I just hope it's never gonna escalate in anything, but it's quite recurrent to see the effect of those foods on the mood of the children, their behavior, the energy level. And then we increasingly know that also, for instance, the teenagers struggle with self-regulation, anxiety, depression, self-harm. And we know that there are many factors, like it could be social media, it could be academic stress, but also if you are constantly fed food that doesn't help with feeling balanced, then is probably an element we should factor in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then tying all of that back into what we were saying earlier about marketing. Marketing to kids is a whole nother, beast in of itself. And there are a lot of kid related products that are ultra processed that seem healthy. And I think you mentioned in your books as well, like these pouches that we see pretty commonly, right? And they have whole food ingredients listed on them, like spinach or kale and sweet potatoes. And then they get pureed into this pouch, and that becomes a staple sometimes in a children's diet, in a kid's diet. But we know that a lot of those vitamins and nutrients have been removed through the processing that keeps it shelf stable. So yeah, being really careful with what we're giving our kids, if we have the means to do it, can be can be helpful, but it takes a little bit of knowledge to get through that.
Yes, it goes from milk formula to food pouches for toddlers, and it carries on through infant snacks to teenagers food, and the industry is very much focused on younger customers because obviously that they are accustomed to certain texture and taste. The longer they're going to be in the loop, so it's in the industry interest to create these mini consumers that then will guarantee a lifelong customers. So yes, again, this food is not innocent. It's heavily marketized, is packed in a way that is appealing to children's eyes, and often is placed children's high level when you walk in supermarkets. So yeah, it's quite deceitful. And once you start seeing it, you won't unseen it, as I say in the book. So it's a matter of really train your eyes to all the marketing strategies behind this food. And is it doable? I just hope anyone there will listen to this podcast not to get overwhelmed, because it's very easily done. You can feel anxious about what you buy, and you might feel not confident anymore on the choices that you make. But in that respect, I always say to people that I deliver talk to, or in the book in any case, always trust your common sense. We are made to believe that we need someone like a nutritionist or, someone with a degree to tell us. But in reality, is very much down to common sense when it comes to food. And you can start by just start making very simple reflections, like I do speak with my children in terms of, does it come from a farm? Does it come from the sea, the tree, or from a plant? No. So most likely it doesn't exist in nature. And if it doesn't exist in nature, probably our body will not recognize it. And if our body doesn't recognize it, probably it's going to struggle with it. And so we can have it occasionally, but we should not have it recurrently. And, it's a matter of what I say often, switching the switcher. Once the light gets in, then it becomes second nature, and you start going around any aisle. It could be in supermarkets, but it could be also in farmer shops. Also, they store food, highly nutrient-processed food. I don't buy everything from everywhere. I always read the labels and make my own judgment before I buy it.
Definitely. And to kind of wrap up, can you give us sort of a quick rundown of what you look for when you're reading labels, or what people can look for?
So yeah, usually the recommendation is first of all the order that ingredients are presented, because the largest quantities go first on the label. So let's say if we are trying to buy a ready meal, and we're gonna have to look at the order in which the food is presented. The ones that are higher in percentage tend to come first on the ingredients list, and then it follows to the smaller percentages. So obviously we need to make sure that, for example, in the case of sausages, we all love sausages. Unfortunately, very often sausages tend to be highly processed red meat, and by that I mean that often in that sausages there could be maybe 50% of actual pork, and then the rest of it is a fillers. Could be like modified starches, stabilizers, spices, salt, and also preservatives, and that make something that is supposed to be a natural animal product into something that's actually highly processed. We need to tend to look for food that instead contains the largest percentage of real food. And that particular case, in the case of sausages, we should be looking at the sausages that contain at least 95% of pork. And then the remaining ingredients should be salt and could be spices or herbs, but nothing more than that. And I'm intentionally mentioning sausages because what is very important to understand as consumers is that the food additives that are most risky for us, they've been established to be highly risky for us, are highly processed red meat. So not red meat, so not steak, not lamb chops. These are safe to eat, and we actually should privilege those food before anything else, But when we talk about highly processed red meat, we're referring to sausages, bacon, ham, pastrami, gammon, and all of these food that the origin is an animal source, but then the level of processing and packaging and the level of food additives added to this food makes them actually quite harmful for human health. So if there is a one takeaway that I would like a listener to consider is definitely this one. That's red meat, like the ones I just listed, are actually being declared as number one carcinogenic. And this is not because pork in itself is carcinogenic, but because particularly the preservative used in this particular type of food, there is nitrites and nitrates. In E number language will be E250 and E251. They are compounds that have been proven not by me, but by the International Agency of Research on Cancer to contribute to the onset of colon, rectal cancer, and bowel cancer. And we see how this type of cancer is increasingly emerging in younger and younger population. So more younger people are experiencing this type of cancer. So it's very important to be aware that a diet high on this type of processed food can seriously put our life at risk. So that is definitely one takeaway for any listener to look for nitrites and nitrates in any type of food before you consume, in particular when it comes to red meat. And also, I would like all the listeners to consider really learning the food label language quite proficiently. Really learn more about E numbers and really start to understand which one are safe, the ones that are middle, well, carry middle risk, and the ones that actually carry high risk. And also another takeaway I think is that this is important because independently of what food regime you follow, what diet you follow, you could be vegan, you could be vegetarian, you could be a carnivore, doesn't really matter. What matters to me in this moment in time that we're living is to establish which food, again, is being so processed to not being able to give us the right nutrients, but also is being compromised to a point where it can be actually actively harmful for our health. So independently of whatever diet you follow, I think food literacy is very important in these days.
Yeah, yeah, I think a big part of what you and I are both trying to do here is really the food literacy component so that people can just make informed choices. And then once you have the knowledge, understanding, then you get to choose what you want to do from there. And it doesn't have to be complete abandonment of anything or a total overhaul of anything, but even a couple of food choices or changes can make a big difference. That was really, really helpful. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to bring up today?
I probably would like to just talk a bit more about the book, and I just would like to add that the reasons why I wrote the book is actually quite personal, and the reason why I'm quite serious about this topic is because I witnessed in my own life the loss of very meaningful people to cancer, and I lost my mother and my brother both to cancers linked to the digestive tract. And I could see full well that the diet choices, the lifestyle choices were not conducive to long term health. So I really feel strong about this topic, and I really feel strong about raising awareness about the real risks that we are exposing ourselves. And that's why in the book, I give as many tools as possible for consumers to start shopping more wisely and make informed consent before they buy any food. And that's it, really.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, you've seen it personally in your own life. I see it really every day with patients. A lot of chronic disease that isn't can't specifically be linked to just food necessarily, but definitely plays a huge component. And all of these things together really have a big impact on the life we experience and the life that we live. And I'm so glad that you're doing this to try and help people mitigate that in their own lives and then hopefully in others that they love as well. So thank you so much. Thank you for all your work.
Absolutely.
This was
It's
so
now
fun.
my life purpose to try and spare any soul what I had to witness and in my life, and trying to rethink a way of aging that is compatible with long-term health and full mobility. There are fantastic cases of people that age well, and even though it feels like illness is something you cannot avoid, and in some respect is true, doesn't have to be so harsh. It doesn't have to be, in any case, so unescapable. We can put in place actions that can preserve our future and our health, and the information is out there. And that's why I wrote the book, by collecting all of the information that I could possibly grab hold in order to give all of this to anyone that wanted to invest in their own health and live longer.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for writing the book. I'll link it in the show notes so that people can find it easily. And I think it was very informative
Yeah,
and
it,
a lot of really practical steps that, people can take to implement things now, which is really helpful. So thank you so much. It was such a pleasure
well,
having you on, and I'm so excited to continue the conversations and to keep chatting.
thank you, you hosting me, and the opportunity to showcase my work with more people. And it's been incredible to meet you as well, because you're on the other side of the planet, but we share so much. We see the world in completely a similar way. I know that we are voicing hundreds and hundreds, if not millions, of people by now that believe that something is amiss.
Thanks for tuning in to Dive into Health MD. Our goal is to empower you with knowledge to better understand how your daily choices influence your health. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it and subscribing so you don't miss what's next. Please remember, this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. For personalized guidance, always consult your physician or a qualified healthcare professional. Wishing you physical, cognitive, and financial wealth. See you in the next episode.